The roar started low, like distant thunder rolling across the parade ground. 500 voices, perfectly synchronized, growing louder with each repetition. MARTINEZ, MARTINEZ, MARTINEZ. I stood at attention on the stage, my Marine Corps dress blues immaculate in the morning sun, 3 stars gleaming on each shoulder. Below me, the entire 1st Marine Division had broken protocol, abandoned their ceremonial silence to chant the name their commanding general had earned in blood and fire. In the VIP section, my father sat frozen, his face draining of color as he finally understood. The daughter he'd dismissed just hours earlier as someone who probably files papers was the General Martinez these battle-hardened Marines were cheering for. I allowed myself the smallest smile. He'd wanted to know what I did for a living. Now he was getting his answer. The chanting had started spontaneously when I'd taken the podium, sparked by Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, a Marine I personally pulled from a burning vehicle in Fallujah 15 years ago. It spread through the formation like wildfire, from the veterans who'd served under me in Iraq to the newest privates who'd only heard the stories. My aide, Colonel Thompson, leaned in. "Should I restore order, ma'am?" "Let them finish," I said quietly. "They've earned the right." Because these weren't just Marines. They were my Marines, and every single one of them knew that the papers I filed had brought them home alive. Growing up as the daughter of Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez, retired, meant growing up in the shadow of a very specific kind of Marine. My father was Old Corps through and through, a Vietnam veteran who believed real Marines were defined by physical prowess, loud voices, and the ability to break things professionally. I was none of those things. Where my brothers Diego and Miguel were built like linebackers, I was small and wiry. Where they excelled at sports and roughhousing, I excelled at mathematics and strategic thinking. Where they could do 100 push-ups without breaking a sweat, I could dismantle complex problems and see patterns others missed. Sophia's got a good head on her shoulders, my father would tell his Marine buddies, but she's not built for the course. Too small, too quiet, better suited for office work. He'd say it affectionately, like he was protecting me from disappointment. But each time, it cut a little deeper. The message was clear. Real Marines looked like my brothers. Real Marines were loud and physical. Real Marines were not bookish daughters who solved puzzles for fun and preferred chess to football. So when I announced at 18 that I'd been accepted to the Naval Academy with a Marine Corps contract, he'd laughed. Actually laughed. "Maija," he'd said, still chuckling, "the course isn't summer camp. You can't think your way through boot camp. Why don't you consider the Air Force? They need smart people behind desks." But I went anyway, graduated top of my class at Annapolis. Survived the basic school not through brute strength but through tactics, endurance, and outthinking every challenge. When others relied on muscle, I relied on strategy. When they powered through obstacles, I found efficient solutions. My father attended my commissioning, stood in the crowd as I took my oath as a 2nd lieutenant. But afterward, at the reception, I heard him telling his cousin, "She'll probably end up in administration. Somewhere safe, filing paperwork. That's better anyway. The real Marines, the fighters, they need good support staff." Support staff. Even as I pinned on my gold bars, even as I prepared to lead Marines in combat, he saw me as support staff. So I stopped trying to convince him otherwise. I deployed to Iraq in 2003 as an intelligence officer, but let him believe I spent my time in air-conditioned offices. When I earned my first Bronze Star for developing a signals intelligence program that prevented dozens of IED attacks, I told him it was for administrative excellence. When I made captain and took command of a company in Anbar province, I let him think it was a desk job. The truth was far different. The truth was that I spent my nights analyzing patterns in enemy activity, developing predictive models that kept my Marines one step ahead of insurgents. The truth was that my paperwork included operational plans that saved lives, intelligence assessments that prevented ambushes, and tactical innovations that changed how the Marine Corps fought urban warfare. But the real truth, the one that would have shocked my traditional father, was that I didn't just file papers. I led from the front. The turning point came in Ramadi, 2006. I was a major by then, serving as operations officer for 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. The city was hell on earth, IEDs on every corner, snipers in every window, death waiting behind every door. One night, our intel suggested a high-value target in a compound on the east side. The battalion commander wanted to send a rifle company, but something in the intelligence pattern bothered me. I spent hours poring over signals intercepts, satellite imagery, patrol reports. And then I saw it, the setup. The target was bait. The real ambush was waiting for our reaction force. I tried to explain, but time was running out. The colonel was under pressure from higher to act on the intel. So I did something that would define my career. I volunteered to lead a small reconnaissance team to verify the intelligence personally. Major Martinez, the colonel said slowly, "You're an intel officer. Your place is here, analyzing." "With respect, sir, my place is wherever I can best protect Marines. And right now, that's on the ground, preventing a massacre." I took 6 volunteers, Marines who trusted my instincts despite my reputation as a desk officer. We moved through the dark streets of Ramadi like ghosts, using routes I'd memorized from hundreds of hours of map study. When we reached the compound, my suspicions were confirmed. The high-value target was a mannequin. The buildings surrounding our planned assault route were packed with insurgents and explosives. We called in the trap's location. Artillery reduced the ambush sites to rubble. The rifle company that would have walked into a death trap instead swept through to find nothing but destroyed enemy positions and dead insurgents. 37 Marines went home to their families because I'd refused to just file papers. Word spread. The quiet intel major who'd personally led a recon team into the deadliest city in Iraq. The officer who'd risked her career and life because she'd seen something others missed. Suddenly, Marines looked at me differently, not as support staff, but as a leader who put their lives above protocol. But I never told my father. When I came home on leave, he'd ask about my deployment, and I'd talk about reports and analysis. He'd nod knowingly and change the subject to Diego's exploits as an infantry officer or Miguel's selection for Force Recon. "At least you're safe," he'd say. "Let your brothers do the dangerous stuff. You keep filing those papers, Major." The years passed, captain to major to lieutenant colonel. Each rank brought more responsibility, more Marines under my command, more operations where intelligence and tactics merged into something revolutionary. I pioneered new ways of fighting, using data analysis to predict enemy movements, developing algorithms that identified IED patterns, creating intelligence-driven operations that minimized casualties while maximizing effectiveness. In Afghanistan, as a colonel commanding a regiment, I implemented what became known as the MARTINEZ method, a fusion of traditional Marine aggression with surgical intelligence precision. We'd strike where the enemy was weakest, avoid where they were strongest, always staying 3 steps ahead through careful analysis of patterns others dismissed as random. My Marines started calling me the prophet because I seemed to predict enemy actions before they happened. What they didn't see were the 18-hour days spent analyzing data, the countless scenarios gamed out on paper, the mathematical models that turned chaos into predictable patterns. But the best part, the part that would have baffled my traditional father, was that I never asked my Marines to do anything I wouldn't do myself. When the intelligence pointed to danger, I led from the front. When the analysis suggested an opportunity, I was first through the door. I earned their respect not through volume or physical dominance, but through competence and courage. They followed me not because I could do more pull-ups, I couldn't, but because I could see the battlefield in ways that kept them alive. By the time I pinned on my first star as a brigadier general, I'd served in every major combat operation of the past 2 decades. My methods had been studied at the War College, implemented across the course, credited with saving hundreds of lives. But to my father, I was still his quiet daughter who probably had a nice safe desk job somewhere. Yesterday had been typical. I'd flown home for my nephew's graduation from boot camp, Diego's son, following in a family tradition. At the celebration dinner, my father held court as always, telling stories about real Marines while I sat quietly at the end of the table. Tio Carlos, one of the young cousins, asked, "What does Tia Sofia do in the Marines?" My father waved dismissively. "Oh, she works at some base administration, I think. Probably files papers, handles logistics, that kind of thing." He smiled at me condescendingly. "Important work, keeping us fighters supplied, right, Maija?" I'd simply nodded. "Something like that, Dad." He'd already turned back to his audience. "Now let me tell you about the time your cousin Miguel fast wrote from a helicopter in Afghanistan." What he didn't know was that tomorrow, Today, I was taking command of the 1st Marine Division, 20,000 Marines, the most storied division in the course, and they'd chosen me to lead them. The quiet daughter who filed papers would be responsible for the very fighters my father idolized. I hadn't told him about the ceremony, just mentioned I had a work thing to attend at Camp Pendleton. He barely looked up from his beer. "Well, don't let us keep you from your paperwork," he'd said, getting another laugh from the table. Now, standing on the parade ground with those same 20,000 Marines chanting my name, I wondered what he was thinking. The ceremony had been broadcast live on the base channel. Someone in the family would have seen it, would have called him, would have said, "Carlos, isn't Ed Sofia on TV?" The chanting finally died down as Command Sergeant Major Williams called the formation to order. I stepped to the microphone, looking out at the sea of dress blues. "Marines," I began, my voice carrying across the parade ground without shouting. Another thing that would have surprised my father. "You honor me with your welcome, but the honor has always been mine, to serve alongside you, to lead you, to bring you home." A murmur of approval rippled through the ranks. "They call me the prophet," I continued, allowing a small smile. "But there's no magic to what I do, no crystal ball. Just careful analysis, detailed planning, and the fundamental belief that every Marine life is precious. That every risk must be calculated. That every decision must be weighed against the cost in blood." I paused, meeting eyes across the formation. "Some of you served with me in Ramadi, where we turned intelligence into ammunition. Others in Helmand, where we proved that brains and bullets together are unstoppable. Many of you know the MARTINEZ method not from textbooks, but from living it. Striking smart, moving fast, staying alive." Nods throughout the formation. These Marines knew. "But what you may not know," I said, my voice softening, "is that every operation I planned, every risk I calculated, every decision I made, was guided by a simple principle my father taught me, even if he didn't know it." I saw the press cameras zoom in, sensed the crowd leaning forward. "He told me I was too small to be a real Marine, too quiet, better suited for paperwork than fighting." I smiled. He was right about the paperwork. I filed a lot of papers. Operations orders that dismantled insurgent networks. Intelligence reports that prevented ambushes. Casualty reports that, thank God, stayed shorter because we fought smarter. A few Marines laughed, understanding. So yes, I filed papers. I analyzed data. I solved puzzles. And I turn all of that into operations that bring Marines home alive. That's not traditional Marine Corps leadership. But then again, I looked directly at the camera, knowing my father would see this. Traditions evolve. The Corps evolves. And sometimes the smallest, quietest Marine in the family becomes the one standing in front of a division. The formation erupted again, this time in organized aura that shook the ground. As the ceremony concluded and I made my way through the receiving line, my aide appeared at my elbow. "General, you have a visitor in your office. Says he's your father." I found him standing by the window, still in the same clothes from last night's dinner. He looked older, somehow smaller. When he turned, his eyes were red. "Sophia," he said, then caught himself. "General Martinez." "Dad," I said simply. He stood there, struggling for words. This man who'd never been at a loss for opinions, who'd spent my entire life explaining what real Marines looked like, couldn't speak. "Finally, the news is saying you're the most decorated female Marine in history." "I'm one of the most decorated Marines, period," I corrected gently. "Gender doesn't matter when you're calling in fire support." He nodded slowly. "They showed your record. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Operations I've never heard of." He paused. "Classified operations." "Yes. You weren't filing papers." "I was, just different papers than you imagined." He moved to my desk, where my awards were displayed. Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Stars with Combat V Purple Heart. His fingers hovered over them like they were holy relics. "You were shot?" he whispered, touching the Purple Heart. "Twice, Fallujah and Helmand. But you never said. You never asked, Dad. You decided who I was the day I joined. Too small, too quiet, destined for desk work. Every time I came home, you'd already written my story. So I stopped trying to correct it." He sank into a chair. "I failed you." "No," I said, sitting across from him. "You motivated me. Every time you said I wasn't built for the real Marine Corps, I worked harder to prove, not to you, but to myself, that there's more than one way to be a warrior. 500 Marines, he said quietly. They chanted your name. My buddies from the VFA were there. They saw their sons, their grandsons cheering for you like, he struggled for words, like you were their hero. I'm not their hero, Dad. I'm their general. There's a difference. He looked at me then, really looked, perhaps for the first time. Tell me, he said. Tell me what I missed. Tell me who you really are. So I did. For the next 2 hours, I told him about Ramadi and Fallujah, about leading Marines through hell and bringing them back, about turning intelligence into action, analysis into victory, about the papers I filed that were written in sweat and blood. When I finished, he was crying, something I'd seen only once before, at my mother's funeral. I'm so sorry, Mindja, he whispered. I was so busy looking for Marines who looked like me that I missed the one who surpassed me. Dad. Now let me say this. He stood straightened his back. I spent 40 years in a course. Fought in Vietnam. Thought I knew what a Marine looked like. He met my eyes. I was wrong. A Marine looks like someone who brings other Marines home. A Marine looks like someone who fights smart, not just hard. A Marine looks like you. There was a knock on the door. Colonel Thompson entered. Sorry to interrupt, General, but the division staff is assembled for your initial briefing. I stood. I'll be right there. My father stood too. Sophia. General, would you mind if I stayed? If I watched you work? I'd like to see what filing papers really means. I considered it. Having him shadow me would be unusual, potentially disruptive. But I saw something in his eyes, not just pride or regret, but genuine curiosity about the daughter he'd never truly known. Grab a seat in the back, I said. And Dad, try not to look too shocked when you see me in action. The briefing room was packed with field-grade officers, maps covering every wall, screens displaying real-time intelligence from around the globe. As I entered, 30 Marines snapped to attention. As you were, I said, moving to the front. Let's start with the Pacific Theater assessments. For the next 3 hours, I demonstrated what filing papers really meant, analyzing threats across multiple countries, coordinating with intelligence agencies, planning operations that wouldn't make headlines but would prevent conflicts, making decisions that would affect thousands of Marines and potentially millions of civilians. I turned data into strategy, reports into action plans, papers into the complex machinery of modern warfare. And through it all, I felt my father's eyes on me, watching his quiet daughter command a room full of warriors with nothing more than competence and clarity. When it ended, as the staff filed out, he approached slowly. I understood maybe half of that, he admitted. But I understood enough. You're not just a Marine, Sophia. You're the future of the Marine Corps. No, Dad, I'm the present. The Corps has always had Marines like me, thinkers, planners, the ones who multiply force through intelligence. We just didn't fit your image, so you didn't see us. He nodded. Will you? Could you forgive a stubborn old Marine? Could we start over? I smiled. Aura, Dad, Aura. That night, at another family dinner, this one impromptu, called by my father, he stood before the assembled relatives and friends. I need to tell you all something, he began. For 20 years, I've been telling you that Sophia worked in administration, filed papers, stayed safe while real Marines did the fighting. He paused, voice thick with emotion. I was wrong. Sophia, General Martinez, has been in more combat than me and her brothers combined. She saved more lives through her intelligence work than any Marine I know. Those papers she files, they're operational plans that have brought entire battalions home alive. He turned to me. I told people you weren't built for the real Marine Corps. The truth is, the Marine Corps is lucky to be built around Marines like you. The room was silent. Then Diego, my brother who'd always been Dad's favorite warrior, started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Miguel joined. Then cousins, aunts, uncles, until the small dining room thundered with applause. Later, as the evening wound down, my father pulled me aside. That chant today, he said. Those Marines, they love you. They trust me, I corrected. Love is earned through shared hardship. Trust is earned through competence. I'll take trust. He smiled, a real smile, free of condescension. You know what? You're right, trust is harder to earn. He paused. I trust you, General, and I'm proud to be your father. As I drove back to Pendleton that night, I thought about the journey from the quiet girl deemed unfit for the course to the general commanding its most storied division. My father had been right about one thing. I wasn't a traditional Marine. I was something more. I was proof that strength comes in many forms, that warriors don't all look the same, that sometimes the most powerful thing a Marine can do is think before they shoot. Tomorrow, I'd be back at my desk, filing papers that would become operations, that would become victories, that would become Marines coming home to their families. And for the first time in my career, my father would understand that those papers weren't just administration. They were ammunition, and I was one hell of a marksman.